Hey guys, this is Matt and Jesse, and today we are going over Chapter 5, the Benoni and Benoni Family variations, is what I call them. How are you doing tonight, Jesse?
I am doing great. Weather here is still great, so enjoying a nice summer-like spring, and yeah, ready to look at some chess. Whole big happy Benoni family tonight.
Yeah, so we're going over kind of five main variations tonight. We're going to be looking at the Benko, the regular Benoni, the Old Indian, the Budapest, and the Old Benoni. And like our other chapters, we're going to kind of base these on approximately the percentage of the time that you will see them. So we're going to start with the most popular, which is the Benko. What do you think about the Benko Gambit?
Um, it is very saucy. I tried learning Benko Gambit from Black's perspective, and I always got so lost that I just kind of gave it up. But it's something that I don't like seeing because it takes the game out of my own comfort zone. Very tactical, very sharp. Pawn structures don't matter at all. It's all about who has the initiative. And so there's a lot of fun lines here from both white and black, especially if you like a tactical game.
Yeah, and I think one hard thing for the player playing the white pieces is it's a positional and a tactical game that's in black's court a lot of times, like you said. Um, and one thing that I picked up when I started revising my black openings a few years ago was the Benko Gambit. And I have to say, switching from Slav to Benko, I had a ton of fun with the Benko. I still do play Slav, but when I want to play aggressive now, and I want to for sure play for the win and make the position spicy, I go Benko, and I get a lot of really fun positions, and I've had good results overall with it from the black side.
Hmm. Yep, so we gotta figure out how we can temper Black's fun here in the Benko. So what are we recommending against C5 here?
So I've looked at a few lines here, and what I wanted to find was something that's a little bit offbeat, but that we can also follow a consistent strategic plan. And I think for this first move, really we have to play d5. If we want to play for the advantage, we have to go d5. So that's the recommendation
Hmm.
going into the Benko. But now here, there's a lot of different options. You can play c takes b, and then when they play a6, you can take again, so accepting both pawns. You can accept one pawn and then not take on a6, or you can not accept any pawns, and that's the route we're going to go. So the recommendation here is knight to d2, and I'm looking at the stats in the opening book. C takes b is over 500,000 games at the club level. Knight to d2, 14,000 games. And this is, let's see, like the eighth most popular move, knight to d2. So we're going to get this game in our court already on move 4.
Yeah, love it. Anytime Matt puts out a stat, everyone has to take a drink. So that's one. Um, sorry, I have no water tonight. So yeah, 92, just simply defending the pawn and not letting black get into this wild, crazy game that they want to play. So 92, we're going to look at a few different variations starting here. We'll first start with what happens if they just take the pawn.
Yeah, so taking the pawn is probably going to be the most common. And our recommendation here is to grab the center space with e4. And the plan is later we're going to play bishop takes c4. And then what we're going to do is, you'll notice black is going to kingside fianchetto their bishop. We're going to play b3 and put our bishop on b2, challenging this bishop on the diagonal. So even though it looks a little bit funny having our light bishop on c4, we have this extra center space, and we're going to try to challenge black's good bishop. And the remaining bishop, this one on c8, it won't really have any good squares down the road. So that's kind of our game plan. We're going to play for different imbalances, and we'll talk through them as we go.
Yep, and yeah, bishop on c4. This structure looks a bit like a Benoni. So a lot of times in certain lines in the Benoni, you want your bishop there so you can squeak in a quick d6 while you can like really open up attack against the king. So it looks a little buried, but it's deadly behind the pawn wall there with a push coming. So e4, I assume if they push here, we can just take and continue as normal.
Right.
So nothing really to look at there. So instead, we'll look at what happens if they play d6, and we're going to get our bishop out, capture a pawn, equalize the material, and enjoy a nice big center. I don't don't think there's much to say about these next few moves. So g6, b3, like Matt just said, we're going to contend the dark square bishop on this long diagonal.
Yeah, and even though it looks like our c4 bishop is bad, we do have to compare it to this counterpart on c8, which is also not a very good bishop. If it comes out to a6, the bishops just get traded. If it comes to g4, even a move like f3, and the bishop doesn't want to go back to h5 where it would be trapped. So it's kind of a bad bishop for bad bishop scenario. And here let's throw our first stat at the viewers. Bishop to g7, looking at this move, white is winning 58% and black is winning only 34%. So bishop to g7, already we're seeing some pretty good stats in white's favor. We're going to counter immediately on the diagonal. And after castling, we are recommending knight to e2. Knight to f3 looks like the natural move, but actually what we want to do with this knight on e2 is we're going to head the knight over to c3 later, most likely, guarding the e pawn, and this might lead to an expansion in the center with f4 down the road.
Yep, so I forget the order of the chapters, but we see this move quite a bit in this repertoire. So planning an f3, f4 with more central expansion. So this fits in nicely with some of our other plans. Black will develop a knight to really the only available square. And we will continue with castling, getting our king to safety, and just kind of prepping for what we're going to do based on how black sets up their pieces. Knight b6, what do we want to do with our bishop here?
Yeah, so here it looks like black is going for the bishop pair after knight takes c4. And even though it's the bad bishop, what we want to do is we want to retreat this guy, and we are trying to control black's play. So we're trying to control the full board, essentially. We have some extra advantage on the queen side with this bishop pointing over here. We have the knight eyeing c4. There's no pawn break. We also have a little bit of extra control in the center with the e pawn. And the king side, we also have a lot of flexibility. So we're playing in a very prophylactic way right now and just kind of checking all of the different things that black could try to throw at us and trying to make sure that we can prevent them. So that's why we're dropping this bishop back with bishop to d3. And then the most common move is here a5. And can you guess what we're going to play?
I just got to shut it down with a4. We don't want to let him play the pawn break, which would be a little bit annoying. I also like how our b pawn is doing a really good job controlling all these squares for the knight to go to. So that's not such a good looking knight right there. So a4, shut it down, play prophylactically, as Matt said. e6, going for a pawn break. Taking here seems like a mistake because they can capture back with the bishop. But we're going to do it. So what's the idea behind taking the pawn?
So the reason we're taking here is because if we don't take, black is going to take us on d5. Yeah. So kind of going back to how we're preventing black's plans, we are almost forcing black's hand here to play e6, because if black doesn't go for this pawn break, where is their play coming from? Whereas we have plans of probably doing queen c2, bringing the other rook to the center, and maybe coming ahead with f4, even e5 in the next couple moves. So there's a lot of stuff that we have planned. Black needs to act quick before we get all of our pieces developed. So they're going e6, and because of e takes d5 being threatened, we're going to take on e6. Bishop takes back. And now we're going to sink this knight into f4. And look at this control on the light squares. So we have d5 under control, c4 under control, and we want to put our queen on c2, bring both rooks to the center, and then look for center play.
Yeah, and this is where we're going to leave this line. So a lot of things going in our favor, lots of space, more very active pieces. So we're in for a fun game here, and we avoided a bunch of Benko craziness. So that's a win in itself.
Yeah, for sure. So now we're going to go back to this point where knight b to d7 was played, and we're going to look at bishop to a6, offering the trade of these quote-unquote bad bishops. But the reason for this is because oftentimes in the Benko, black will look to trade off the light square bishop because that's their worst piece. So even though it's our worst piece, black has a little bit less space, so they may be inclined to still go for this trade.
Yep, and here's a good example of the tension in the position. It's like these bishops are likely going to be traded, but it seems like a bit of a concession if we take them and we allow them to develop their knight. You can see our knight is nicely placed to defend the bishop, so if they take us, we can capture and get our knight a little more centralized. So instead of taking immediately, we're going to play queen c2, just a nice kind of centralizing move with our queen. And then we're actually overprotecting the e4 pawn, which is critical here. So if they take the bishop, we can capture back with our knight. And that's exactly what happens. And so we get our nice jumped into this really great square. It's kind of an immortal outpost right now since we're blocking the d5 square from black advancing. So very nice square for our knight there.
Yeah, so even though black traded off their worst piece, if you think about this in terms of how much time it took, bishop to a6, bishop takes c4, takes 2 moves. They have not improved the development of their other pieces. In one move, we already put this knight on this great square c4. All of our pieces now are looking really well placed, so I don't think this line is as strong as black as the line where they kept the light square bishops on.
Mm-hmm.
So the main move now is knight b to d7. Here we're going to castle. Our plan is to play f4 if black doesn't do anything quickly. So here knight to b6 is the main move, threatening a capture. And how should we deal with this capture?
Yeah, so it's our knight is a very good piece, and black's knight isn't really doing much on this square. So we could take and life would be okay, but I think it's a little better to back the knight off. So there's a lot of juicy squares that we can utilize here. So this c4 square is going to be forever weak. But maybe someday we can even jump into f5 or just use these knights nice and central and control a bunch of space. So look at all these squares that this knight is controlling. Those are very important squares. So we'll keep the knights on and we don't want to allow them to trade. So knight e3, a5, a4 again, baby. Block that a pawn.
That's right. And our plan now is we'll probably put one rook on b1 to help guard this b3 pawn. If needed, the bishop can always tuck back on a1. And then we're going to put the other rook on d1 and then probably play f4 and go for e5 because the rook on d1 gives a second defender to this pawn. We have rook and knight guarding it, allowing us to play e5. And let's just turn on the engine real quick for the first time in this chapter. We're seeing about 0.5 for white. So pretty comfortable small edge. We have the extra space. And this is one where you can kind of look for some sample games as well, or just play through it in your Blitz and Rapid Play online. Get a good feel for the ideas, try things out, check lines in the engine afterwards.
Yeah, for sure. And as always with this repertoire and every ChessGoals repertoire, at the end of the line, we'll give you a plan. So if you wanted to train like all the cool kids, just take a screenshot of the resulting position and test yourself on the plan. That's a good way to do it.
I like that. Train like the cool kids.
I wouldn't know. I'm not a cool kid, but I've heard.
The cool chess kids. So now let's look at d6 on move 4. So we just looked at b takes c4, which was played 4,300 times in the club database. Now we're looking at d6, about half as popular as b takes c. So you will still probably see this quite often. So what should we play here when they're not taking on c4?
Yep, I think we go with our standard plan. Just grab the center, e4. So this knight does a really good job of controlling both of these points and really solidify this very annoying extended d5 pawn. So e4, very strong move here. And we're going to just keep grabbing as much space as they will let us. So here we're going to look at a line that doesn't transpose because if they take here, we're going to very likely end up in very similar territory. So instead of taking, let's look at a move like b4, kind of closing up the position. Here, we're going to play the immediate f4. I love it. Just really expand and threatening e5 right away.
Yeah, and this is very similar to what we're going to recommend in the Benoni lines. So when you see these Benoni, Benko type structures, it's really hard to fight against them with a super solid system. And that's one reason that they're so effective at club level from the black side, because players can't just dodge the theory and hope for good results. Like, it's a dynamic system. You have to kind of fight fire with fire, and that's what we're going to do here. So even though we're playing this knight d2 offline, The reason for that is we're putting the game hopefully in our court where we're more comfortable, and now we're still going to push ahead and go for the quick attack. So f4, like Jesse said, threatening e5 straight away. The main move is g6. Looking at the stats, 62% for white, 35 for black.
Everyone drink. So we're going to look at a line where they don't prevent e5. So just there you go. So we can kind of get a feel for what this position may look like. So g6, again, immediate e5. They could play a few moves here, but they should all be pretty similar. So we'll look at d takes, f takes, and what's the most popular move in this position right here, Matt?
I see 29 games in the database. 20 of the 29 are knight to g4, and this is already a blunder. So one thing we do in these repertoires is we really focus on club level play. So we're not trying to tell you what Kasparov used against Anand or Carlsen used against maybe Hikaru. What we're trying to do is show you what club level players are playing in practice. So we have a club level database from Lee Chess based on real games. This is the most popular move, and it's a blunder. And the way we take advantage of this is e6. And there's a dual threat. Take on f7, and the simple queen takes g4. So already black is in trouble. They're going to have to lose the knight or they lose castling.
Yep. And this move is so strong because it cuts off the defense from the bishop's defense from the knight. So that knight is now hanging. And yeah, that devastating take the f-pawn threat is tough to combat. So black licks their wounds. Knight f6. Take the pawn, king takes, and I think we can play just about anything here. So we'll just develop a knight and continue the line a little further. Bishop g7. Still got to be careful. This diagonal can get spicy, so we got to watch out for that. But here we have a nice knight move. Knight g5 check, or sorry, knight e5 check. King g8, bishop d3, and stuff is looking good. Yeah. Stuff is looking real good.
And one nice thing with this knight e5 check is it forced the black king to box in this rook in the corner. Mm-hmm. So it's a really natural move to play knight e5 check or even knight g5 check, like Jesse was saying. Get that king to box in their own rook, and then we use the fact that all the pieces are still on the board except 2 pawns each. That king is not going to survive on g8 with the rook on h8, and the light square is open. So our plan now is castle, queen e2, knight f3, attack the black king. Sorry, what were we going to say?
I was going to say, if only black could transport their knight or their rook to f8, it'd be life is good. But this bishop is going, or sorry, this rook is going to take a few moves to get liberated, and so we have all that time to build up an attack.
And it's hard to even think about, like, how does black free that rook here? You can't push the h pawn because the g pawn's going to drop. Put the bishop out here. Yeah, maybe with the king coming to g7, but it's really scary.
That's a undefended bishop there, so you got to be very careful.
Yeah, that king.
Oh yeah, that's a nice move there.
The king is on the run. What's the eval here? Let's check it quick. 2.7.
2.7 I'm seeing, yeah.
Very nice. Okay, so we're already up almost a whole piece at this point.
Yeah.
So now let's go back to the last line in the Benko. This is move number 4. And we want to look at g6. So at this point, knight d2, g6. Black is hoping now that we capture on b5, and maybe we can transpose it to like a regular looking Benko, more or less.
Mm-hmm. Yep. But of course, we're not going to go for that. We're going to go with our standard move e4. And black needs to be careful here because if they fianchetto the bishop, all of a sudden we can push, and that's looking really hairy. Lots of center space, and this bishop is about to get locked out of the game. So instead of fianchettoing immediately, black takes a move to play d6 and prevent the e5 break.
So now we have an interesting move. This one's not very popular, but what we're recommending here is a4. This is only played in 9 games, whereas b3 here is played in 1,000 games. But the reason we're doing a4 is we're trying to think about transpositions to the other lines in this chapter. So we try to be aware in these courses of transpositions in limiting the theory that you have to know. So because black is not taking on c4 and we want to keep it in that territory, we're actually going to just force the issue and recommend a4 here, because now essentially black has to push or take. B takes c is the main move. We're going to take back with bishop, and now we kind of get back into a more main looking line that we've seen.
Yeah. So again, Matt thinking prophylactically or thinking ahead and creating the repertoire to give us similar lines, similar plans. Thank you, Matt. So bishop g7 and another similar looking move here, knight e2 again, looking for maybe an f-pawn expansion someday. So I think the only difference between here and the main line is we have this pawn on a4. So again, very similar structure, and we played a4 pretty soon anyway. So
Yeah.
that's a good move anyway. So castles, and what's the move here?
Here we're going to play knight to c3, this idea we talked about earlier. So the g1 knight routed over to the queen side to help defend all these light squares. And after bishop a6, the main move, here we're going to castle. And again, we see that bishop moving twice by black, bringing our knight to a really nice square c4. And the only difference here, like Jesse said, is pretty much this a pawn, and black did not play a5 in this line. So you could maybe argue that this move order is slightly better for black if they know what we're going to play. But this is still a good position for us, and it's very similar to the other lines we've looked at.
Yep, and I really like this next move here. It's actually the first move I was looking at after knight d7, knight b to d7, a5. So if you remember before, this knight maneuver was pretty annoying because it threatened our very good knight here. But after a5, it of course takes that away, and now this knight on c4 is just a monster. That's a really great piece there that really holds the whole world together for us. Attacks a lot of squares, defends a lot, can attack in a moment's notice. So really great piece for us. a5 is a very quiet but very solid move. Big fan.
Yeah. So a5, not only is it defending that b6 square, also we are making use of this extra a4 move in a really nice way. Mm-hmm. So all around, this is just a good idea, playing a5. And then what's our plan here, Jesse, in the next couple moves?
Yeah, so before we get too crazy with f4, I think it's probably good to take a move to tuck the king away, so get off these dark squares. So maybe king h1, queen c2, overprotect this pawn. And then we can start playing f4 and maybe e5 someday too. So take a few moves to kind of get settled. Don't go too crazy with the f-pawn. Tuck the king away. Get your pieces on good squares. Then we can talk about pushing the f1 and expanding.
I like it. I like it a lot.